Good morning, everyone, and welcome to
Good morning.
The Narrajelt MyShare event. I'm Lee McDowell, the president of the Nara chapter of JELT, of course, JELT, Japan Association of Language Teachers. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here this morning for our event. We have 22 people joining us today, which is wonderful. A lot of NARA members, a lot of local members, and a few from around Japan. We've got some from Osaka and Kobe. Maybe not everyone's here at the moment, probably still coming, but we're on 10 o'clock. We're on Japan time, so starting exactly 10 o'clock. And yes, welcome everyone. We've actually got a few members from overseas as well, which is great. You know, I guess one of the good points about having online online events is that we can include people from outside of Japan. And so welcome to everyone. This is the first live event that we've done in over 12 months. We've had events in 2020, but they were recorded online events. And so this is the first time that we've had a live event for a long time. And it's very good to have you all joining us to get together today, almost like the real thing. But as I said, sometimes even better because we can have people coming from further afield, and you can do it in your pajamas, although probably not a good idea. So yes, I just want to say welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us for this event. The MyShare event has been a long-running event for Narrajelt, and it's a great practical forum for sharing language teaching ideas. And it's exciting. We have four separate presentations today. And I am going to hand over now to our event leader, who's going to introduce the speakers and tell us a little bit about what we need to do for the discussions and keep us all on track. So good morning, Robert.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lee. So, as presenters have been informed, you have 20 minutes. At the 15-minute mark, I'll give you okay, to let you know that you've got 5 minutes left. And at the 20-minute mark, I'm sorry, I'll just have to cut you off because if you go over time, this whole event is going to take longer than we really want. There will then be a 10-minute Q&A session. So if you would like to add your questions during the presentation in the chats part of Zoom, then please add your questions there. If not, just when it's time for the Q&A, we'll just have a free-for-all. And I'll cut everyone off at the 10-minute mark. We'll then have a 5-minute break for the next presenter to get ready and to allow participants to go to the bathroom, get a cup of coffee, etc. Okay, everyone, let's resume for our last presentation for today. So the topic of sexual harassment in Japanese society is probably a very topical one at the moment. And perhaps young women in Japan may be very hesitant to speak out about their sexual harassment experiences, even in their native language. However, in the guise of foreign language learning, female students may be less apprehensive about this, as they may see it as a language learning exercise or experience. So our last MyShare presenter, Elisabeth Williams from Doshisha Women's College, will share with us some activities she has used in the classroom to facilitate discussion on this sensitive issue. Libby, your time starts from now.
Great, thank you. All right, I will share my screen. Here we are. All right, everybody can see this okay? Yes, great, thank you. Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. Yes, so my name is Elisabeth Williams. I generally go by Libby. I'm an assistant professor at Doshisha Women's College of Liberal Arts. Today I'm going to be speaking about my experience teaching an introductory gender studies class, specifically focusing on talking about the very important but often very difficult topics of sexual harassment and assault. So I'm just going to share 2 activities that I did in this course last year. I'll start by giving a bit of context to the class, talk about some of the goals, then look at the activities, and then discuss some things that perhaps went well and some that were very challenging, and then we'll go into the Q&A. All right. So this class, it was a special English medium instruction class, so an EMI class for students who should have been abroad at English-speaking universities. So they should have been taking kind of introductory courses like this, but because of the COVID pandemic, of course, unfortunately, they could not. So the university asked some of us to make kind of special classes for this group of students. So I had 5 students in this class. It was a very small, very close-knit group, second-year students who they all knew each other already. So we had generally a very good, a very warm and open atmosphere. Because it was kind of supposed to emulate these classes abroad, the class didn't require really a specific English skills focus. And so we didn't spend that much time, going over things like grammar and vocabulary. And in a way that was a bit of a struggle at times. So we'll talk more about that later. And the way that the class was kind of run was that after going through basic feminist theory and theory from masculinity studies, then we moved into looking at case studies. So gendered relations in 3 countries, New Zealand, Japan, and Iran. So these specific activities take the place in the context of our Japan case study. So everything that we did was in person. So this was in-person classes, this course, but I think these activities could be easily adapted for Zoom. So that's something we can talk about in the Q&A if you like. So of course, there were many goals for this class, but the one that I think is connected to today's presentation is that we aimed to discuss how ideas of gender connect to wider structures of power in a community, in society. And that is connected, I think, to the first reason why it's important to speak about these topics. And as was already mentioned, we're seeing a lot of issues in the media with talking about harassment and gender inequality in Japan. And we can see, I think, quite clearly the way that these gendered relations, so essentially thinking about harassment and sexual harassment and abuse, the way that the abuse of women generally by men is connected to these wider kind of gendered hierarchies in society. So I think that looking at these topics addresses that course goal. And really, very unfortunately, we know that harassment in particular is a very, sexual harassment is a reality in many students' lives, particularly female students. And yes, and so and then in the media, on social media, we're seeing a lot more open discussion about these issues, and a lot of kind of modern or current feminist figures like journalist Shiori Ito or Dr. Ueno Chizuko at Tokyo University have also been very open speaking about these issues. Now, of course, we also, I think we can kind of guess why it's not always easy to speak about these issues. First is that there's still a lot of taboo and discomfort, I think personal discomfort around these, the topics of sexual harassment and sexual assault. And we need to be very sensitive, of course, when we do speak about them, because there's a good chance that students have experienced them, and some students may have lingering trauma from that. And if we think about the kind of English language skills side, there might be a lot of unfamiliar language for students. So when we're speaking about these topics in English, there's a lot of words that have become very common in the last few years, like consent or victim blaming or, things like that. So this is language that students might not be familiar with. So we might have a difficult time even just speaking about it in English. So moving on to looking at the two activities that we use. So they took place in the context of two classes within the course, where we were looking at current issues in Japanese feminist movements. And there was the two activities that I'll focus on. We did a lot more than this, but just for today, looking at, we looked at a PDF of rape myths that I used online from a university in the States, and also a street interview YouTube video. So let's take a look at the activities. So first, starting to break the subject of sexual harassment and sexual assault. I thought it was important first to, before going into looking at the PDF about rape myths, was to discuss what is a myth, right? So we got together in pairs and we talked about what is the definition of a myth, and then we made some example sentences together. So with the students, the definition we came up with was a widely held but false belief or idea. And the examples: a common myth in business is that men are better team leaders than women. Do you think it's a myth that men cannot be sufficient caregivers to children? So we, after we talked about the definition and we looked at some examples together, then I wanted to move into speaking specifically about myths about sexual harassment and assault. But I thought it was important to first give or to first discuss an example as a class together using some visual, a visual prompt. So I found an image online that talked about the common misconception that clothing equals consent. And so this is the image that we used. This doesn't mean yes, this doesn't mean no. So we have the same woman here who's dressed in very different styles of clothing. This is, we talked about in class, what do you think this means? What is basically, what myth is this trying to expose? And so from here, we discussed the connection between clothing and sexual invitations, et cetera, and how basically the misconceptions behind this. So that was our first example of a myth in this context. So from there, we went on to brainstorming with a partner about myths and then sharing them with the class. So this part, unfortunately, we didn't come up with as many myths as I had hoped, but the three that the class did, we came up with as a class. Women often lie about sexual assault and harassment. Men cannot be sexually assaulted. Sexual harassment is not a serious problem in Japan. So these were the three that we came up with as a class. And from here, we moved into looking at the PDF, the rape myths PDF online. So students, I uploaded this to the university platform, and we have our online class page. So students could access it on their phones or on their own laptops. So the way that we approach this activity, basically students in pairs, they kind of skim through. It's actually 2 pages, but I just have the first page here. So they skimmed through, discussed the meaning with their partner, and then they also talked about just basically their opinions, their perspectives about the myths and the facts below. And so during this time, I just kind of circulated and helped mostly with vocabulary, because there was quite a bit of challenging vocabulary in the PDF. And we talked about the ideas kind of, I walked around and talked about the ideas with the students. So it's difficult to see here, but some we have victims provoke rape when they dress provocatively. Sorry, it's not rape if it happens after drinking. Only young, pretty women get raped, etc. So after students had discussed this a little bit with their partners, then as we kind of came back as a class, and we went over what myths the students had heard before, just getting a little bit of feedback about their own perspectives. And then we added these myths to the previous list that we had made. All right, and I think this activity was a little bit challenging, as I mentioned, because of the vocabulary. And I think we can see it in the first example here, right? So provoke and provocatively. So these were both words that students struggled a little bit with. So after we looked at that PDF, then I wanted to bring the I kind of wanted to bring the class, the context to Japan, since that was the case study that we were looking at. And I thought I would do this by using a YouTube video about Me Too, opinions about Me Too in Japan. And we had spoken about Me Too in previous classes, but mostly in the context of countries abroad, particularly where it kind of started in Hollywood and in the United States. And so after we did just a brief review, then we went into watching the video. And the video that I chose is by a YouTube channel called Asian Boss. And I'm not sure if you're familiar, but they do a lot of very interesting individual interviews and street interviews in countries all over Asia. And this one was street interviews in Tokyo. Just asking kind of random people what they thought about the Me Too movement, if they knew it, what they thought about it. So one of the reasons why I chose this video is that I thought that it showed an interesting gap in between what younger people, particularly younger women, thought and some of the older men in the video. So I just have a couple screenshots to quickly look at. Here, these two women were talking about how they think sexual harassment and assault are very serious issues in Japan, but that it's not something people feel comfortable talking about, and they believe that people should be speaking more about it. Sorry. And then we have contrast to this man here with the glasses, who spoke about how he felt many women were, yes, overreacting to compliments and to basically his opinion that Japan has the traditional gender roles in Japan are based on women serving men, and this isn't a negative thing, but a lot of younger women don't understand it anymore, basically. And then there also are some examples about women who have been harassed or assaulted. And this woman here shares her experience where she was groped walking back from the train station, and obviously was very traumatizing for her. She said she couldn't walk home alone for about a month after that. So we watched this video with the street interviews, and then in partners, we discussed these three very general questions. And I really try to encourage students, to speak about anything in relation to the topics, but these were kind of the guiding questions. So the first question, what do you think of the video you just watched? Did you agree, disagree with anything you saw in the video, and why? And why do you think such a low amount of female victims report sexual assault to police in Japan? And it's estimated to be around 4.3%. This is something that came up in the video. So after we discussed, we came back as a class, and students kind of summarized their pair discussions. And then we had a really kind of open, robust discussion in English about the topic. And that relates to, I think, some of the successes from these activities. The first being that, yes, we had a very open discussion where all the students shared either their experiences or maybe something from someone else they knew experienced. And I think that the students were really able to kind of connect these experiences of harassment to gendered images of men and women in Japanese society, sometimes outside of Japanese society as well, and how this relates to those structures of power where, I mean, generally men are oppressing women through the acts of harassment and through the acts of sexual assault. And so that connected, of course, to the course goal that I spoke about earlier in the presentation. And after this, so the homework assignment that we had after these two classes was a short essay, personal reflection, of course, in English. And it seemed that students really seemed to learn a lot through the activities, and that they found the video quite a helpful prompt for discussion and to kind of open up about these experiences and to critically reflect on the issues in Japan. So I felt that the activities helped us reach those course goals, but they were certainly, it wasn't without the challenges. And I think that it was the PDF activity that was particularly difficult. And it could be that students were hesitant to share their ideas about myths about sexual harassment and assault, or they didn't have so many ideas about it, but they just weren't comfortable. But I did feel like the conversation was a little bit kind of, it wasn't very smooth at that section of the class. And as I mentioned before, there were some struggles with vocabulary, and I didn't pre-teach vocabulary except for consent and myth, really, before we went into the activity. So things like non-consensual, provocative, victim blaming, these words came up a lot in the PDF activity, but students were quite unfamiliar. And then again, just thinking about how important, but how sensitive these issues can be, speaking about sexual harassment and sexual assault. We moved quite slowly through the activities and through those two classes. So we really just didn't have enough time, I think, we could have discussed, I think, even more deeply and even more critically. So those were some of the challenges. All right, so that is the end. I'm stopping just about 2 minutes early. Thank you very much for listening, and please do feel free to ask any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Libby. There's one question from Richard, and he asks, have you tried this with a larger group?
That's a great question. No, I have not. This was the first time that I taught the introductory gender studies course. And it's the first time that, that I used this activity. I certainly think that it would be doable.
Well, don't you think it'd be easier for students to talk in smaller group with a smaller group than within a larger group? I mean, just.
I'm sorry. I thought you meant with a larger class. But the question.
Oh,
yeah. So I think.
Richard, you want to clarify?
Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, so it was a larger class. You said your class is about 4 people at the moment. So for example, if the class had 40 people, for example.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that was one of the reasons why we were able to speak quite openly about these topics, is because we were such a close-knit group, such a small group, right? The students all knew each other before. So I definitely think, and being a women's university as well, right? So I think that if we had a larger group, and if it was, yeah, a group with more diversity, it could be a little more challenging. So I would definitely, I think that with these kind of topics, it's really important never to pressure the students to speak about it if they don't feel comfortable. And also, I think that being in small groups first, I mean, like with many activities, can really kind of get them talking and get them more comfortable. So I think I would keep the activities quite small.
Any other questions? Please go ahead. What was the level of your students anyway? I mean, it's quite a, I mean, emotionally it's a difficult topic anyway, but to be able to actually express yourself about the topic, what sort of level were the students? Like on the set?
Yes.
Would you say they're a B?
Oh, it really ranged. So this particular group of students, they're kind of, the way that they're assessed is from A to G, I think, and A being the highest. And so we had students, there were students from really kind of the top proficiency to really I would say quite beginner level students. But again, because it was an English medium class and it wasn't so much of a skills focus, we did mix Japanese when we had struggles, and we kind of worked together to talk about it. Yeah, I think Rachel, I think you had a question.
Yes, so not so much a question, I think maybe more it's just a comment or regarding the hesitation you faced with the PDF activity. I'm wondering, would it, if there was a way for students to brainstorm or share their ideas anonymously at first, whether that would be something that could create more ideas for the activity to then springboard to the next point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think just given the high use of like online platforms now, I think that's something that could be easily facilitated into the class. And if I was to use these activities with larger classes, that would certainly be a really great option, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? So I'm guessing this is the first time you did this, is it? The first time to do this topic?
Yeah, the first time, yeah, to teach.
So after doing it one time, any reflections on how you might have approached it differently next time, or?
I think I mean, if I'm going to be totally honest, I wasn't always comfortable speaking about some of the topics myself. So I think I would like to kind of be able to go about, not in a more like, almost maybe I was too hesitant at times, I think. So perhaps to try to approach things even a little more academically, as opposed to, I don't know. Yeah, it was tough, right? I think talking about things like rape, sexual assault, it's really hard. And I always want to be very conscious of the students' feelings. I don't think it could ever really be easily done. So yeah. Yes, Paul.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Libby. It was very interesting. How did you evaluate student performance in the course or classes?
That's an excellent question. And I should have mentioned that with these activities were, it was only the video discussion that was evaluated, and that was only for participation. Yeah, so this course, the evaluation was more, we had a small group facilitated discussion where students chose an article about the course content, and then they kind of facilitated small, because we only had 5 students, it was quite smooth. Then we had a final presentation and a final paper.
So you mean they were evaluated for their participation and the presentation and the final paper?
Yes, those were the main things. And then, of
Okay.
course, there was, you know, attendance and
I see.
homework.
Thank you.
Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, are there any other comments?
I see.
Rachel has a question.
Yeah. So I think I think Baby Low has a comment. What's that? I don't know what that is.
Angela's baby.
Oh, I see.
I was just trying to be funny. Yeah.
I do have a real question though,
Yes.
if that's okay. So
Yeah.
do you think you would approach this differently if you had a mixed class, a mixed gender class,
Yeah.
males and females in the class?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think it 100% has a place in mixed classes, but I have never, I haven't had the opportunity to use it yet. How I would do it differently, I would really have to think about, I think, the way that the groups, that the small groups were put together. And I think that I would do more kind of more earlier activities about men's place in this, basically. So in speaking out against sexual harassment and sexual assault, and look more at statistics that involve men, whereas having a women's university with only 5 women, I focused much more on the female experience. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
We've got 2.5 minutes left, so if anyone else has a comment or has a question, please go ahead.
Yeah, I do.
Rachel, you have a question?
I just wanted to say that I have done this topic with a mixed group of students.
Mm-hmm.
Not exactly intentionally, but I let students choose the topic, and several women from Japan came with this topic. And it was very interesting about the female-only cars. And I'm not exactly proud of that class, I have to say. It devolved a little bit into a debate over somehow whether or not it was worth the money they spent on these cars or something. And the men were against it and the women were for it. It was kind of, so it kind of started out well, but then didn't really go anywhere. And I think that was largely to my lack of skill or preparation for the topic. So I was very interested in what you said and how you scaffolded things. So I really, really appreciate your talk. Because I felt that it was useful to students, and there was a lot of value in discussing it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a very difficult, as I said, it's a very difficult but very worthwhile topic. So thank you. And I think Rachel had another question.
Yes. So was this course designed as was this an elective that students could choose to take, or was it something that the students were required to take? I'm curious because when you said you only had when you had 5 students, I'm wondering, is there a way to I guess get more students in the class? I guess what I'm getting at is, like, is this something that Japanese students would want to take and want to do more discussion about?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I do think that it's becoming more of a less of a taboo topic. But the context of this class is that for this particular group of students, they were all supposed to have been abroad in English-speaking universities, but couldn't go because of COVID. So the university asked us to a couple of us to create these very small kind of seminar classes for the students. And so yeah, that's why it was so small, and it was just for a really kind of a very particular group of students.
Thank you. And the second question I have was, you mentioned earlier you had case studies with New Zealand, Japan, and Iran. Could you describe that more about what that looked like, or how that was taught in the course?
Absolutely, yeah. Do I have
seconds.
Time? Sorry?
10 seconds. Can
Okay,
you wrap
Rachel,
it up?
why don't we connect over email and I can send that information to you?
That would be awesome. Thank you so much.
We can also leave the Zoom meeting open if you guys want to stay on and keep chatting, but we have to wrap it up now.
No problem.
Okay. Let's connect over email, and I'd love to pick your brain later.
Yeah, that I would also, because I enjoyed your presentation very much. So
Thank you.
great. Thank you, everybody.
Hand you back now to Lee. Thank you, Libby.
Yes.
And hand you back to Lee for the closing remarks.
Yes, and thank you again, Libby, and to all the presenters today. It was very interesting and very informative, and really great to be back in a group together, although it's remote. We're not in the same room, but this is certainly much better than nothing, isn't it? So thank you again to all the presenters for your time, for your efforts. I mean, traditionally after our event, we'd go out and have a nice lunch. Actually, Nara Gelt in April, we'd probably go out into the park. It's always a nice place, and have a little picnic in the Nara Park. But unfortunately, we have to still be patient with that. But as I said, I mean, at least we can have this kind of interaction, which is very valuable for me, and I think I can speak for all of us. So thank you, presenters. Thank you also to the officers. There's a lot of effort that goes into these events, a lot of time, and thank you to everyone involved there, and also to participants for joining us today from near and far. It's really good to see you all, to have you all here with us, and we look forward to more participation in the future. I don't have the next event to announce, but you'll be in our network, and you'll be finding out shortly when our next event is on, and then we look forward to seeing your faces again, probably online for some time, but hopefully in the not too distant future we'll be able to get back together again in the same room. I think we'll still actually, you know, after 2020, I think we'll still keep that online element to be able to have people like Gina's coming from Chicago, which is really a new, I guess, a new adventure for Nara Gelt, to be able to welcome people from overseas and all over the world. It's great. So once again, thank you to everyone. And I'm going to leave this meeting open just for a little bit more, and ask the officers to stay on. But if you're quite welcome to continue the chats here. But I'll close this MyShare Nara Gelt event by once again saying thank you very much, and see you next time.